Welcome. Welcome back to my channel Conquer the Fear. Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to talk about the top 10 mistakes that the beginner makes when creating the backend with a Spring Boot application. So, avoiding this mistake is crucial and building a flexible, scalable, and the effective backend, right? So let's start the video. If you enjoy this particular video, please subscribe the channel. Feel free to leave a comment, suggestions, topics for the future video. So let's get started. So the very first thing what we are going to discuss about is why your application, the Spring Boot application, is not performing well, right? Uh, the first thing is that when we notice, then it is not that you have not optimized your auto configuration. Okay, so when you're building a Spring Boot application, you may use many dependencies and the libraries. Basically, Spring Boot is auto going to auto configure, right, feature automatically. So those all libraries are set up, right? However, sometimes you might include some unnecessary dependencies which not even you require. So this is going to make your application slow, and also which might also cause some conflicts. So what you have to do is that to optimize this, you can exclude some specific auto configuration. For example, let's say you have included data source for auto configuration. So if you're not using it, this allows for a better control and improve the performance. So what will happen that you will remove that, your application will not take much time. Okay, so that's what the benefit is about. Now here, if you see, I have opened the project. I have created a Spring Boot application. Okay, I have opened it in the IntelliJ. Now this is the main application over here. Okay, this is where the application is going to start up. Okay, so if you see here, if you first go to the pom.xml. Okay, now if you see here, I have I have a starter web over here. Okay, so you must be already knowing that when you're creating a web application, okay, so the starter webs are required, right? So these are all the starter dependencies which we require to make our application up. Now, as we already discussed, if you are not pom.xml is not very much optimized and accurate, right? So it may happen that it is not very much optimized and it is unnecessarily taking time to start up your application, right? So in pom.xml, you will have the all the starter dependency. Okay. So if you go to that very top, okay. So this is the artifacts and other details. What is the Spring Boot version and all these things. Then comes the dependency section. Okay. So whenever you go to that particular application and then open this, you will be able to see all the dependencies which you have added. Okay. So let's say for an example, I've added it over here. Now what will happen is that let's say if you add this particular dependency which is currently not required, example, okay, so let's say these two dependencies are added over here. Okay, now if you see, there is an actuator as well, right? So this is required, but in cases of, like, let's say you doesn't require to monitor something, this is an unnecessary dependency, right? So if what you have to do is that this particular dependencies, whatever you are going to not use, right, or basically what I will do is that I will just comment it out. Okay, so what will happen, so if you have unknowingly added some dependencies, let's say you have copied it somewhere, right, and you have created your project, so this is making your application a little bit slow, right? So make sure you have a very accurate dependencies added, because if you see, there is these are all transitive dependencies. Now this is again going to be downloading the different set of libraries which are supported by this particular, right? So make sure you have this particular accurate information. Okay, so that's the first thing where you can actually uh, I mean, if you have added this, you have to remove this. Okay, so that's where your first optimization come in picture. Okay, now second comes ignoring the dependency management. Now what happens is the Spring Boot dependency management is automatically going to handle your compatible versions or libraries, etc., right? However, you're going to manually specify some version which can also lead to a conflict. Okay, So it is generally suggested that you let Spring Boot manage this particular version, especially when you're dealing with starters dependency. So avoid copying or pasting dependencies from internet without considering the compatibility. Okay, so make sure you are copying and it is going to not impact your application. Okay, now if you see here, I've uncommented the code, but what exactly if you see here, this is the version over here. Okay, now what might happen that is that you have added the dependency, right? Now what happens, you have added the version as well, which is specifically some version we have downloaded and you have copied from the internet. Okay, let's say you had some problem and you try to google it and the internet, and then you try to add this dependency, right? Now what happens is that if you try to add some version specifically, it might happen that this is not compatible with this particular version, or that it might happen that it is not compatible with the version, right, of Java as well. So what you have to do is that you have to remove this particular dependency and let Spring handle this particular dependency version manually. Okay, so make sure that you are not adding this thing, right? So always try to have let Spring Boot add the dependencies versions. Okay, so this will make your application less conflictive. Okay, also let's say there is some version conflict with the with the Java version or the Spring Boot version, your application will start only. We are looking on the third problem, that is we are not handling your application dot properties properly. Now you must be already knowing there is an application dot properties in the the Spring Boot application, right? So this is going to configure used for the configuration. Now configuration might be like various kind of different environments, development, testing, production related things, right? So we have to use Spring profile, which have to take the advantage of that to create your separate property files for each environment. Let's say for the application, for the dev environment, you have some different configuration. You have QA environment, there is a different configuration. For production environment, there is a different configuration. So to make sure that you doesn't add this particular in the application dot properties directly over here. So you make use of the profiles, and then if you see here, I have actually created a application hyphen dev environment related properties. Now I'm going to add this particular detail. Now this can be added with different set combination of values you need to retrieve from the, or the properties you need to set, right? So make sure you are adding this particular specific profiles related property files. So all your configuration information, the sensitive information are stored in single application files, right? So this is not an ideal situation. Okay, so that's where we have to correct your code. You have to segregate your application hyphen dev dot properties, production related properties. There might be some security key which you have to add up, right? So make sure you separately create a particular for the different environment, and also if there is some sensitive information, it is stored in some environment variables kind of thing. Now we'll talk about the fourth problem, that is dependency injection problem. Now if you are overusing your at the rate auto wire, for example, if you are injecting a bean, right, which can lead to a circular dependencies issue, or it is going to make your application difficult to test. So what you have to do is that you have to prefer the constructor injection, as it is going to resolve that particular problem, and it is going to allow you to easily test your application with some mock objects. So while if you are auto wiring can be used, right, so you have to use a constructor in general to for the better practice. Now we'll look into the exact thing. So what exactly I meant is that now if you have a, let's say, the package service over here, right? Okay, and have you created your service, right? So let's say I'm creating my service over here. Okay, now this is going to be a service class, right? So what you have to do is that, okay, you have to annotate this. Now what we have to do is that, or I mean, I'm firstly trying to tell you what is the problem with this, right? So what happens is that, will you, let's say you have some my repository. Okay, so let's say I'm going to create another repository over here, my repository. Okay, I think I need to create a package here. So repository. So under this, if you see, let's say I have a my repository class. Okay. So let's say it is for now it is, let's say I write it right. So what happens is that under this I'm going to make use of this particular my repo repository. Okay. So I'll create this. Now what you happen is this, that when you are having this particular auto wire over here, right? So while testing there will be a problem. Okay. So injecting this using the auto wire is going to lead some to issues like when you have to test your application, or let's say there is some cyclic dependency. So this is not going to handle this particular uh, problem. So the correct approach is what you have to do is that in this particular my service, what you have to do, let remove this particular at the rate auto wire. Now what you have to do is that you have to create a constructor public my service, and then under this you are going to import here. Okay. Now this dot my repository is equal to my repository. Now when you do this, right, the constructor injection, this is called constructor injection. Now uh, this is generally preferred way for when you want to test your application and also for the clarity, right? So this is the actual way to use it. Okay. So which will not only break it, but you have to do here is that you have to annotate it with the auto wire here. I hope this is clear to you. Okay. So maybe the fifth one, what we are going to talk about is that you're using the actuated dependency. That is incorrect. Okay. Uh, if you have not added your Spring Boot application with the actual dependency, so what is going to happen is that you are not going to get the monitoring feature or health checkup features functionality which should be available for monitoring. Okay. So make sure when you are trying to have this particular form.xml created, right? So make sure you have already adding this particular actuator dependency. So what will happen is that once you add this particular this thing, right, it is going to be enable your monitoring and then health checkup. So under this also, what you have to do is that you have to do enable certain properties as well. Okay. So make sure you are adding those particular properties, like we have some enable things like by default, and then you have to include what is the health checkup, the URL and the info. There are different types of URL which are given. So you have to give your base path as well. So this kind of things which will enable your application to monitor and track it. Now the next thing what we'll discuss about is the blocking main thread. Now what happens is that let's say you have a long running task, right, which can block your main thread. So which is going to create your performance issues. So what you have to do is that we have an annotation called at the rate async. So this annotation is going to execute your task asynchronously in a very separate thread, not in the main thread. So remember, you have to enable your asynchronous processing in your application configuration. Let's say I have a service over here, right? So let's say let me create one service over here. Let's say I have a notification service created. Okay. So let me annotate it with the service class. Okay. So now here under this, what I'm going to create some method over here. Let's say I create a void method over here. Okay. 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 So I think yeah, let's create a method over. Let's say I'm sending some email example, right? So what I will do is that let's say I throw some exception here, some interrupted exception, something like that. Okay. Now what I will do is that I'll write something logic over here, right? Okay. Now let's say this application is going to run, right? So the service is going to run this. Now this might block your main thread. So while let's say you have some thread sleep under this, let's say you have written some thread dot sleep over here. Okay. So let's say I'm making it for, let's say, 500 second, 5000 second. So until this particular thread is sleeping, right? So your main thread, the main block is going, the main thread which is there now, it is going to be blocked up only. So until that you'll not be able to do anything. Okay. So in order to avoid this, what you have to do is that, so under your this method, what you have to annotate is that there is an annotation called async. Okay. So you have to enable this particular async on this topic. So it will not run on the main thread by the main thread or a single thread. It is going to be run as a separate thread and a separate process. Okay. So now another thing what you have to do is that at the main class you have to annotate this particular with. Now you have to enable your async, right? So you have to, there is an async analysis. You have to do that. Now once you do this, your this indicates that this is going to enable the asynchronous functionality in your application, and this whatever we have written over here at the method level, this particular method will be run as an asynchronous process. So this two has to be in the combination, and then only you will be able to run this in async mode. Now let's discuss about the exception that is globally handled, right? So let's say you have some problem, you have not handled your exception globally. So handling the exception globally is quite important, and that is taken care with the @controller advice, and there is an exception handler. So you have to centralize this particular error handling and make sure you looks, I mean, your code looks cleaner. Okay. So you have to create a global exception handler class to manage your exception across your application. Now how to do that, I will look into it. Now I will go to the main, right, and I will create a package called controller over here. Okay. So what happened is that, let's say I will created a my controller over here. Okay. Now under this, what I'm going to do is that, first of all, I'm going to annotate this with the rest controller. Okay. After that, what I will do is that I will create a method. Let's say I wanted to do some get data over here. I misplaced this get data. Okay. What is going to do is that this is going to return some, let's say, just for now I'm going to print something over here. Okay. So I'm going to return some, let's say, ABC over here. Okay. Now this is the method, right? Now what you have to do is that we have to, let's say I'm adding the getter mapping over here, and I'm giving the URL over here. Let's say, now let me give the data over here. Let's say get data. Okay. Now what we'll do, right? This is uh, this simply what I'm going to create is that I'm going to create some, let's say, data. Okay. And I'm going to be null over here. Okay. Now why I've written this is that now I'm going to return, let's say I've just replaced this with data dot, let's say I'm going to return the toString method over here. Okay. Now what will happen, this is data, right, and there is null. Okay. So when you run this particular application, there is going to be a null pointer exception thrown up. Okay. So that's the problem, right? Now in this, like, you will not be able to handle any exception, so it is going to ultimately shut down your application. Okay. The correct approach is that what we already discussed, that we have to globally handle any exception which is thrown. So anywhere in your application the null pointer exception is thrown, you have to gracefully handle that. So we'll look into, like, how to get that sorted out. So what you have to do is that, let's say I'm going to create a package called error handler, let's say. Now under this I'm going to create a global exception handler. Okay, now when I create this, right, so under this, let's say I have exception over here, right, exception handler. Okay, under this what I'm going to do is that I'm going to write a null pointer exception, because this is what actually I wanted to handle it, right. Now what I will do, what exactly has to be done here, now what I will do is response entity. Okay, so I'm going to gracefully handle this here. Now if you see here, I'm going to handle my pointer exception over here. So what I will do is that I will call the null pointer exception npe, and then I'm going to return the response here. Okay, so here what I can do is that I am going to return the status as http status dot, let's say, internal server error. Okay, and then I'm going to give some body over here. Okay, let's say something over here like the body, right. So let's say, just for an example I'm talking about, okay, I will give return this. So here I'm going to write that this is gracefully handled or something like that, there is some exception, right. So this is going to globally handle it over here. So any exception which is thrown over, but the one thing what I've done is that I am at the as this is a global exception handler. Okay, on top of it I need to annotate with the controller advice. Okay, so make sure you add this, and until that you will not be able to handle it, right. So any exception which is, let's say, in the controller, this appear, there is a null pointer exception, it will come here directly over here. It will going to find, like, there is an exception handler already written over here, and this particular method is going to return it over, so that it will be handled properly. I hope this got the problem. Now we are talking about misusing the JDBC or JPA APIs, right? So you have to avoid using your large set of data, right? You have to avoid retrieving large amount of data at a single go. So you make use of the pagination or database specific queries to optimize your data retrieval process. So what you have to do is that the database level only, you're going to handle the data filtering and the sorting whenever there is a possibility. Now let's look at, like, how we can how are we currently misusing it, right. So what I will do is that I will create a repository over here first. So let's say I'm going to create a order repository. Okay, I've created an order repository over here under this repository, and I'm given you the repository over here. Now this is going to extend the JPA repository. Okay, so now I think I have not enabled the database configuration over here. Okay, so basically you have to create your JPA repository over here, and then you have to add order, let's say, and then you have long. Okay, now just assume that this particular class is complete over here, and you have the complete implementation over here. Okay, so what you do is that now in the surface, what I will do, let's say in the same service, what I will do, I'm going to auto wire Okay, and I'm going to make use of the order order repository. Okay, so I'm going to make use of that order repository over here, and then what I'm going to do is that list of orders. Okay, so get all orders. Okay, now let's say you have written a logic over here, okay, of retrieving all the, let's say, in the repository what happens, right? You call a find all method, okay, and then it is going to return a list of orders which are there, all of them, right? And under that you're going to one by one add it into the array list, and then you're going to return that particular list of order. Okay, so what you have to do is that don't do like that. Okay, what you have to do is that ultimately, which is going to put unnecessary load on your memory. Okay, so on your application as well. So what you have to do is that you have to create a separate method. So what you have to do, at the repository level only, in the repository, what you have to do is that you have to create a method over here. Okay, and you have to create a order list over here, and then you have to write find, let's say by status you wanted to find something over here. Okay, so you have to create it, the status, and then ultimately return this. Now this particular method, what we are going to make use of this is that under this particular service, instead of calling that particular all these things, actually what I will do, I will only try to segregate or get the data which is only required. So I will call this particular method from this method itself. Okay, so what I will do, I will just call the repository over here, and I will call the find. So as of now, there is an exception. That is the reason it is not coming. But from here, actually, I will be directly calling that particular method over here to get those details. Okay, so once I get this particular details, it is going to be only those particular things. So we are not putting unnecessary load of first trying to get all the data, and then at the code level I'm trying to keep it in the memory and trying to sort something. Okay, so at the query level only, at the first instance only, I'm trying to find out that particular filtration or that is applied at the retrieval phase only, so that it doesn't need to do any processing while you have to try and map it. Okay, so let's say you have, let's say the other problem is, let's say you're not securing your API. So especially you have some admin APIs which are not properly authenticated, or you have not done some role based authorization over there. So what happens is that, so you have to, your front end will be directly compromised. So you have to implement your backend API to prevent some unauthorized access. Okay, so that's the approach we should be taking about. So never leave your endpoints having that particular security feature enabled. Let's say you do some role related or authenticate. Once you authenticate, you authorize and check it, like whether this particular guy is able allowed to access this particular endpoints or not. Okay, so that will give you a more granular responsibility to say your application to be developed in a proper secure way. So at the rest level, okay, let's say now you have this particular endpoint over here, right? And you doesn't want this particular endpoint to be exposed. Okay, so what you have to do is that, because you are, what when you expose this particular endpoint, what will happen is that this is publicly accessible to everybody, and this can be retrieved. I mean, this operation can be performed by anybody. Okay, let's say for the, instead of this particular get, there is some insert. Okay, and you doesn't want that particular to be accessed by everybody, right? So you can make use of the authentication authorization in order to this particular endpoint. So what you have to do is that at this particular level, at the controller level, what you do is that you do the @ pre-authorize things, and then you have to define the roles over here. What is the role this particular uh, is allowed to access? Okay, under that, let's say you define that, let's say only admins are allowed. Okay, so that endpoints will, this whole controller would be pre-authorized, and then you will be only allowed to access this particular if you are an admin. Okay, So that is what actually we should be using, right? So let's say the request mapping I'm talking about, the endpoint also you have to do like, I mean, at least you have defined this particular endpoints which are only applicable for the admins. Okay, that's where this API will strictly be available for him. So it is going to ensure only admin has this particular action and nobody else. Now we'll discuss the last point, that is when you're using the logger, right? You have to enable the proper logging. So you have a logging library which is going to be like instead of like system.out.println, what you do, you have a better control for the better flexibility. We are using the log levels like debug, info, error, etc., which are categorized into the messages. Now what you have to do is that you have to avoid logging certain critical things like password. You have some production related things, right? So in the production, what you have to do is that you have to adjust the logging levels and the configuration level whatever it is required and secure. Okay, so we'll look into how we can do that. Ideally the resolution, what we did is, and what I want to tell you is that at the logging level you are not this is not an ideal way to write this in the sysout, right? So we have to define certain logging level that uh, I mean, you have to have some flexibility and the control, right? So what you have to do is that we have to make use of the logger over here. Okay, so what you do, you define the private static final logger. Okay, so you create this particular logger. Okay, and then what you do, the logger factory is there, right? So you have to get the logger. Okay, and let's say my controller. Okay, then class. Now this will be in a better way to, let's say you have defined logging levels over there. So logger factory is going to use to obtain the logger instead. Now you can print, you can actually take care of logger.info, logger dot, let's say you want to do info this particular, instead of this what you can have to do is that logger.info. Now all the info related things will be printed. Let's say you're dealing with the uh, dev environment, so this will enable you to uh, okay. Now this will be only helpful for the non-production environment. Let's say you want to do enable something for the production, right? So what you can do is that, so now actually like it is not enabled. So here you can do is that log.error we can actually define over here, and then you can log that particular error. Okay, so based on your logging level whatever you have defined over here, you can place that. Okay, so make sure you do in a very professional way, and so that and not in the old way where it is it is not very much flexible. Okay, so this is very quite flexible. You have to just import this particular logger factory. You have to just make use of the info, error, or debug things. Okay, and you have to define. So based on your logging level whatever you have enabled, this is going to work in that way. So until this, like we have covered all the 10 common mistakes what a Spring Boot application developer does in their development environment. So if you found this particular video to be very helpful, please subscribe and hit the bell icon and like the video. I would be very happy if you leave a comment or a suggestion for the future topics. Thank you for watching. Goodbye. Have a great day ahead.